Welcome to the second video of the series of Playing with Uncertainty. Today we are going to analyze the scenarios of war from where we left off. This scenario is not absolute, it's the idea to show you behind the thinking of war, and it can go with any possible outcome ever. Now, let's start with the fundamentals here where we left off. Now, here we have the potential plans for the red team. Well, in theory, the plans are 1,000,000, but I'm just giving an idea. Do they continue of attacking on the west and using the current forces they currently have on the east to re-establish connection with their forces? Do they regroup their forces from the east from the west, regroup them, and then move them to the south along with their current troops to initiate something of a different advantage and cutting off the enemy's attacking forces? Or do they regroup their forces, reinforce, reorganize with their limited now supplies that they currently have and strike with one stroke blow and reconnecting with their forces? Now let's take into account that they already suffer quite a lot of confusion and chaos, and they are massively disorganized. Their best units which are already bogged down on city fighting have already suffered quite heavy casualties, and they're probably lacking a lot of ammunition and supplies, and retreating them from combat takes quite a lot of time, and you can't just immediately throw them back into combat. You need a set amount of time for them to organize. So is the choice between launching a counterattack immediately or reorganizing and launching a more guarantee attack? Now, the choices for the black team are: do they try to break the enemy's lines on their flanks here and completely going away from their original plan and try to achieve a massive exploitation? This has quite strong limitations since the majority of their mobile units are already in the north, holding a very weak position. But nonetheless, they have quite strong infantry and some armor forces here that they could in theory try to cross the river very slowly or use the bridgehead with their much superior and stronger forces to break through and achieve the plan. Do they continue reinforcing the forces on the west because they don't know what the other team will do? What if they remove their forces from the west here? So let's say they take quite a lot of those infantry units, move them away, reinforce their positions they already achieve, and thus to achieve the encirclement. But then the red team says, I don't care, I'm going to continue attacking on the west, and as a result completely eliminating their own cities, and thus they are getting their own logistics getting destroyed. Do they immediately launch an attack with the current forces they possess, or do they plan to regroup a bit before the launching? In contrast to the other team, while their mobile units did cover quite a lot of landmass, and they may have lost some reorganization because of that, they haven't encountered a lot of combat. So we can safely assume that their forces have quite strong combat capabilities yet, especially their armor forces as well as their heavy infantry, while their infantry's general was bogged down in city fighting and did receive quite a lot of casualties. Here, maybe you haven't noticed, it's quite a big river crossing, so any type of unit, if it's opposed with any kind of force, it's practically impossible to cross through. Furthermore, they kind of have a thorn on their back, which is this motorized infantry unit bogged down on an actual city, which is very heavily enforced, and they didn't actually manage to capture the city's objective here, but they're on the outskirts of the city, and that's need much more forces to maintain the defense of that. So here the defenders have the advantage because you already have good defensive positions. So how do they utilize their lead? How do they utilize their exploitation? Do they reinforce? What should they do? Now, in this game scenario that we're going to see, they will choose to reinforce their already hard-won position with their stronger forces. Those forces will take quite some time to achieve that. So the forces that are currently in the front line will, rather than stay on the defensive, they will try to continuously push in, utilizing the surprise they already have achieved to completely surprise the enemy, and use the mobile defense as well as the city here to hold some sort of a position. But the main thinking is to move the majority of their mechanized and motorized forces within the northern part of the city, and thus create a hammer to the anvil of the enemy's defenses. Now this strategy is quite a strong gamble because you don't really know what the other team is going to do. Now the red team in this scenario they're going to analyze, since their positions have been quite problematic here, they lost quite some units, they take quite a lot of casualties, and they are completely cut off of their logistics. So if they don't manage to capture the city and break the encirclement here, then their units are just gonna plainly starve or completely lose or logistical support. Their choice is to withdraw behind the river and thus establish a very strong defensive line, take the majority of those forces, reorganize them into one position, and then immediately launch a massive assault. The idea here, though, as I mentioned prior, it takes quite a lot of time to reorganize forces that already have taken quite a lot of casualties, and you're lacking supplies, and the road network, you already lost huge portion of your road network and so forth, so they have to move like this and then move to the north and move there. These units have to pass through their man-made bridges and gradually move into this position, and they still don't know what the other team is going to do. Furthermore, the black team, something I forgot to mention, is going to go with the riskier plan and to use their exploitation. They will try to start moving their infantry units from the front line to go and support the bridgehead they have managed to achieve. The issue is, since the red team right now has the interior lines, as I have another video on interior lines of defense, it's much easier for them to relocate such forces and do such a maneuver compared to the red team. Now, let's go directly into the battle. We are moving in past the first phase, so the black team has initiated their attack. They managed to get a foothold on the city. They moved the majority of their mechanized forces on the north, and their heavy infantry is gradually moving on the north to reinforce, at the same time focusing on destroying this pocket, and their infantry has left their majority of their positions from the north, has moved through here, and they will gradually go in and reinforce the front line. Let's not forget these units are badly damaged, and there are quite a lot of them, so it takes quite a lot of time for them to move out. The idea behind it is that since they are still just holding on to the city, they just barely have enough forces to hold on until the red team starves out. Now, the objective here of the red team, and let's not forget the fog of war, the red team doesn't actually know what is actually happening. In their mindset, they may still believe that the majority of the black team's infantry still lies around here, the units they were just fighting, and they don't know, for example, that the red team has moved the majority of their armor in the north. The only thing that they know is that they are still attacking, and thus assuming that they have strong forces there. And thus they allocated their forces, the red team, into two main strike groups, one concentrated over here and one concentrated over here. They managed to reorganize to launch a massive assault on a two-pronged offensive to completely cut off and get back their logistics. Their thinking is that if they do that, the black team will have to react and stop attacking and move backwards, which a lot of commanders will do, but some others will not. Rommel, I see you there somewhere. Now, let's see how the battle develops. So this is the general battle plan as I described, and this will be the outcome. Now, the red team did manage to break through the enemy's forces over here, so they did manage to establish a connection of their logistics, but immediately establishing a connection doesn't mean immediately receiving the supplies their units are in desperate need of. So these units are struggling a lot with a lack of supplies. They suffer very heavy losses because of the city warfare, especially their armor. And also what they did not expect is that the black team will continue its initiation of attack on the north, and thus, since they didn't have a reserve, finding themselves in a very volatile position. And here comes another important topic, the vitality and importance of holding a reserve. As Frederick the Great said, the one that holds the reserve the most is the one that wins the battle. Napoleon also put heavy emphasis on reserve on his book Maxim of War, where the idea of holding reserves means whatever happens you can react. And here the red team, believing that the black team will inevitably have to go back since they will be cut off, they will not continue initiating their attack. But they did. Now they have established their bridgehead. Now what do they do now? Their flanks are completely exposed, and as a result probably all of their supplies tend to be stored in cities and villages have been captured by the encircled black team mechanized troops. Those troops, we can assume they still have quite strong supplies because they haven't truly encountered a lot of heavy resistance up to this point, so they can continue fighting. And we can also safely assume that they did capture quite strong equipment from the enemy's force. So their main idea now is to launch a massive offensive across the front line, so even in the areas here and here, and the main idea is to pin down the enemy's force. Pinning down the enemy is very vital in war because it makes it much harder for them to disengage from combat to move somewhere else. In the act of disengaging, if you are getting attacked, you are receiving quite heavy casualties and you are very exposed to getting destroyed. So the objective of the red team right now is to create at least some sort of a protective barrier behind them using their strongest forces and do a small reorganization as to be able to initiate a counterattack, at the same time moving in troops to protect their troops in the city that already are fighting. What they are not expecting is heavy attacks coming from here and the heavy infantry that's going to reinforce the pre-existing infantry here, that they will initiate an attack from the south. Again, the rest of the black team will attack across the front line, and here it's not seen very well, but the black team has the majority of their heavy infantry, which is quite strong, attacking and pinning down units that are trying to retreat, and thus causing them quite extensive damage. The only units here of the red team that are able to fight and are in pink condition are those three units that we have seen prior here that haven't really engaged in combat. Now, moving on to the development of the battle, we come to a scenario like this. The red team has managed to achieve some sort of a reserve line on their flank, and their units gradually get organized again to launch another attack. But as I have pointed out prior, their logistics are probably at a breaking point at this moment, because now they just start to trickle in and they have been moving all around and fighting all around and launching offensive. So all of their forces are very strongly undermanned and most importantly undersupplied. And now the black team, on the northern front, has managed to achieve an encirclement of the forces in the city and thus connecting them with their own supplies. And thus these units, since they're also much fewer in number, they can start receiving reinforcements. At the same time, the concentration of force of the black team here of their heavy infantry remains quite strong, while the red teams, since they move the majority of their stronger forces to the north, is much weaker. Now the black team, the only thing they care about is to hold this position, and somehow capture this position. And thus the idea is to move all of their infantry, of their heavy infantry they possess over here, to attack on this position, as well as use their motorized and their mechanized units to attack. And even if the enemy does attack them, again, game theory, it wouldn't matter, wouldn't change anything, because their main objective is to cut off the enemy's logistics. Now the red team, the way they're thinking about it is, if they completely move north, and up to this point they still again don't know the exact numbers of the black team's positions and strength, they will assume that they will be able to overrun them, but this will come to a cost, and we come to a scenario such as this, that they did manage to break through. They did manage to encircle a motorized unit. They do have some strong units on paper over here, and the black team is quite exposed. But, and that's the biggest problem, they lost completely their logistical lines. And since they have lost their logistical lines, over here and over here and over here they have exposed, they are in quite tremendous position. All of those units, especially the infantry units on the south, that have been constantly fighting because the black infantry is constantly attacking them. Even if they are not actually gaining ground, they are attacking them and then consuming them resources. All of those units at this point are so massively depleted to the point that we can consider this battle already lost. The only thing that the black team needs to do at this point is to hold on to these positions over here. Maybe these troops can withdraw over here and here. It doesn't really matter. The enemy's forces on the city will eventually get overrun. They start to move infantry reinforcements from the south to break in to their interior lines and their rear lines, and as a result they will completely eventually collapse. Now this is just one outcome of the 100 possible outcomes that can occur in a battle. Now, what we learn from this? One of the most important things is always maintain a strong reserve. This thing applies even in modern war. Either you're going to have a very strong and small in size force of armored units that will act as a reserve, so whatever happens you can strike them down with very strong forces and then spinning them, or at least have weaker but a lot of infantry based forces across your main lines of defense, and that will imply holding on city positions. And as you hold on city positions, it doesn't matter if the enemy comes in. If they're using armor, it will take forever for them to take those positions. The second thing is how important is game theory in war, and at the same time the limitations of game theory of war due to pure randomness. Then we have the problem of too much caution in war. Taking your time to reorganizing and launching an attack is very vital, but at the same time quite risky when it comes to warfare. And again, never forget the most important concept of war is the actual destruction of the enemy's force, not to just capture land. And after 4,000 years of warfare, apparently we still haven't learned that, and we still go for the big objectives. Every single major battle in the history of humankind. So never care about land. As Rommel said, land is something you gain, you lose. It doesn't matter, it's a piece of ground. The most important thing is to destroy the enemy's force. If you manage to destroy the enemy's force, then you can capture as much land as you want. And again, another concept here from O'Reilly in World War II, a quote that I really like, and other military historians argued and generals in the past, never reinforce failure. And that comes to the point of Clausewitz that you have to focus on the gravity of the battle. The gravity of the battle is the deciding factor of victory. And a good commander, as Clausewitz said, is then it's after once the battle has initiated, it's up to the actual skills of the commander to actually realize where is the gravity of battle and reinforce that position as much as possible. That will imply reinforcing the defense or reinforcing an exploitation, even if it causes you to get encircled. Again, Rommel here, but based on the ideas of Guderian and von Manstein. And lastly, and most importantly, that again modern militaries tend to forget, while big boom boom wins wars, to acquire big boom boom, you need the supplies to do the big boom boom. Logistics are always the key. Protect your logistics, hold important geographic positions, and even if the enemy breaks through, their forces will be so overstretched and lacking of supplies because they cannot use main roads that eventually, if you have enough armor units on your own that you haven't still used, you can then use to destroy the enemy's force. I will eventually come back on this topic and maybe make a specialized video showing a different scenario of how this battle develops based on the reactions I receive on this video. Thanks again for watching. If you like more content like this, which we analyze war games specifically, please like, subscribe, comment, and have a good night.